Impact of Influence, the Murdaugh family murders. This is the unfolding story of a powerful South Carolina family, the mysterious deaths they are linked to, and our quest to bring you the truth. Hello, friend. Matt Harrison, Seton Tucker, and producer Dwayne all back at it again. So grateful that you spend time with us. We know there are so many options, and that you've continued to hang with us through all this time is much appreciated. Michael DeWitt, the great writer and historian and storyteller, we do a podcast with called the Wicked South Podcast. You can catch that on Facebook, same title. And we did an episode with him about the Murdaugh legacy of running the whole system down in the Low Country. And Randolph III in 1990 was dealing with an attempted rape case in Allendale County. And he put this guy into the first-time offender program. It was supposed to be first-time nonviolent offenders. This person was neither, for this attempted rape of, and Henry Louis Wallace was the man who it was later learned out did have an extensive criminal history, but they did not find out about it. All the details in that episode. And he goes on to kill and rape at least 11 women in North and South Carolina, becoming known as the Charlotte Strangler or the Taco Bell Strangler. And so we've started digging into that case, and there's a lot to unpack. And we're going to start with one of the prosecutors in this case who tried this case over many, many months, very strenuous trial. And her name's Marsha Goodenow. She's had 30 years experience as a JAG officer in the Air Force, prosecutor for 39 years, worked on well over 1,000 murder cases, worked the Wallace case from the beginning, and she joins us now. All right, Marsha, thank you for joining us. We're going to find out some things today that I don't think a lot of people knew about if they've been following the case, say, in the last 10 years or something. So I do appreciate that.
Well, I want to kind of start out asking you, have you ever tried a murder case or a case against a serial killer?
Before this, no.
This is your first, and this is a big one to start out with.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. I'd only been in the office maybe 4 years when I got assigned the case.
Were you aware that murders were happening in the city? What was Charlotte talking about these murders before you found out about the rest?
No, not at all. That's another thing the media has created. No one knew there was a serial killer until the two murders that happened on March the 9th of 1994. That's when the police said, something's going on here. Henry Wallace was in custody within 4 days of that.
And you are given the case after the confession? Or are you there during the confession? How does that play out?
I was not there during the confessions, but I was assigned the case within maybe 2 days of him being arrested.
They obviously thought you were capable, if you were assigned within 2 days, that you were the person to be able to handle this type of case.
From what I understand, and correct me wrong, he really went into details in these murders.
He went into incredible details.
And it's violent, strangulation and some stabbing and rape. You're new into the system. Were you mortified, or did you have some way to separate that from the sickness of what went on?
Well, I don't know that you ever separate yourself from the sickness. But after having done this now for almost 40 years, I think the body has a way of coping, because if it didn't, you couldn't do it for that many years. The people that can't do it get out.
So he had the arrest, he has the confession, and then you have to prepare. And obviously, I would assume this is obvious to people. You're not preparing for guilt or innocence, right? You're preparing for whether or not it's a death penalty case. Am I correct?
Well, you're preparing for both, because nobody usually that is facing the death penalty pleads guilty. It's a trial because they're hoping to get a verdict less than first-degree murder so that they won't be facing the death penalty, since first-degree murder is the only thing that death is an option for.
So that was on the table even when the confession?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And the defense had a strategy to try to convince the jury that it was second-degree murder and not first.
Was that based on his mental illness or his drug addiction?
It was both. They were basically saying because of his mental illness for all of them and his drug addiction at the end, that he didn't have the capacity to premeditate.
So you're preparing, I think I read, for 6 months. And in that time, are you starting to study the ways that other defense teams have handled people who are serial killers or whatnot, and the psychological aspect of that? I'm assuming you hadn't dove deep into it at that point.
No, and of course, we prepared for more than 6 months. You're preparing for the minute you get the case assigned to you. My strategy was more of preparing on how to deal with the serial killer. Myself and a team of homicide detectives actually went to Quantico for 3-4 days and worked with the behavioral science unit on studying serial killers. You know, we broke down all of his cases and everything that he did and discussed them. The way that I handled the defense portion of the case is once they gave us the list of who their experts were going to be, I literally went out and found every book that their experts had written, and I read every book.
Wow.
So I would know where they were coming from and how to attack their testimony.
And that includes the woman who Mindhunter is based on, Ed Burgess, I assume, right?
Ann Burgess, yes. She was one of my favorite people to cross-examine.
When you say favorite people, do you mean that in a facetious way? Like you were able to handle her, and was she just smart, and that's why you liked it?
Yeah, no, she came into the courtroom looking like, you know, somebody's grandmother, and she was a nurse. And so I thought, well, I've got to have to use kid gloves with her because the jury's going to like her. They didn't like her.
Oh,
and
really?
So I was able to go totally after her. Her testimony was so unbelievable. I mean, she said that he fantasized raping all these women. I mean, his DNA was in their vagina. I don't know how that's a fantasy.
Oh, so she was saying not okay. I
he
assumed
wasn't living in reality.
Okay, so so her case was that she didn't even rape him, really just fantasized.
Correct.
But yet there was DNA inside them.
Not all of them, but yes, inside of. I think we ended up finding DNA maybe in 4 of the 10 victims.
And they talked about childhood and that sort of thing in this. And did you go after that concept?
Well, yeah, that was a pretty easy concept to go after. He said that he was beaten with electrical cords and water hoses and parts of his electric racetrack. But at the same time, they said his house had no water and no electricity. So I don't know why you have electrical cords if you don't have electricity. I don't know why you have an electric racetrack if you don't have electricity, or a water hose if you don't have water. So I was able to point out things like that just did not make sense.
Because also the one FBI agent that's also
Wrestler.
There you go. Sorry, couldn't find his name. What was his? Because I think he went first. What was his pitch?
He said that Henry Wallace was a disorganized serial killer, and disorganized serial killers are mentally ill. There was no scientific basis for that assumption at all. Once again, I read all their books, all their studies that they did that all these TV shows are based on were from interviewing 40 killers who are pathological liars. So all of your data is based only on 40 people who are proven liars. So their data to me was flawed. But even after that, Henry Wallace, until the very end, where he just sort of degraded because of the drugs, was an incredibly organized killer. That's why there was no sign of him left in any of those murder scenes. So I was able to show that he was an organized killer, and that there was no, even if he was disorganized, there's no proof that meant he was mentally ill.
I want to back up just for a second, because you said you went to Quantico, and the 2 people you talked about that were from the Mindhunter thing were Quantico people at one point. Where was the FBI that you saw in Quantico in your interviews pitching a different or painting a different picture to you than the two people you had to cross-examine?
Totally different.
Really? So, yes.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Ressler at that point, his only source of income was testifying for defense attorneys. He was no longer an FBI agent. So he would come in basically after being hired. And if he didn't help the defense, then he didn't get any funds.
Wow. And so at Quantico, they went into more depth, I assume, of all the ways that serial killers differ and whatnot.
Correct.
And one of the things I believe I read was that there was a lack of patterns in his crime. And
Yeah, he was different than a lot of serial killers.
Do you think he did it on purpose?
He did do it. He said he did it on purpose in his confessions. He bragged about, and he actually used the word, I changed my modus operandi from murder to the next murder so that the police wouldn't catch on.
I've not heard this mentioned. This has not been, I've not heard this reported. And you think it's something that isn't reported because there's a certain narrative that people want to tell, and so they don't want to share that?
That's exactly correct. There is a narrative, and it's not true. I mean, these detectives that worked on these cases did an incredible job, not even knowing there was a serial killer. The amount of work and investigation they did, that then once we knew who it was that linked everything to him, made our case.
Let's talk about this media attention that this case was receiving while you're trying it. You know, you've said that y'all weren't aware that this was a serial killer situation. How was this portrayed in the media?
The media never covered but one of those murders that I recall, and that was Dee Sumter's daughter, Shauna Hawk. They covered that murder at the time, and they covered it because Dee took such a proactive role after her daughter died, informing Mamo to help, the mothers of murdered offspring. So it was Dee getting the attention. The media did not cover these girls' deaths. They didn't cover them until that last month, which was March of 1994. And in March, he killed 3 women within 4 days. That's when they started covering the case. There was no Charlotte Strangler. There was no Taco Bell Strangler. I would beg you to show me a newspaper article before the last 10 years that ever even referred to Henry Wallace that way. Oh, so no one knew there was a strangler loose in Charlotte.
So the nickname didn't even happen till 10 years after or whatever, long after the trial.
Correct.
Oh, but was the trial when it started, was that covered a lot?
Yes.
Okay.
That was extensively covered.
Like
his case was covered, yes.
So the national media was also looking at it?
That I can't tell you for sure. I don't know if I recall the national media covering it or not. But I know the local media covered it extensively.
So we were told by a guest that we had, we've covered this Murdaugh trial, that the defense and prosecution were looking at the media every day. Did you, as a prosecutor, look to see what the media was saying, or did you just ignore it?
I did occasionally, and what always baffled me was how one thing would happen in the courtroom and something else would be portrayed on the TV news that night. It's like, were they in the same place I was in? The printed media, the newspaper, did an incredible job of covering it. They sat in there all day and listened to everything. They didn't walk in for 10 minutes and then go out and report something.
Can you imagine now what that kind of trial would be like with social media and court TV? Has that ever crossed your mind?
Not until you just said it, and I can't even imagine. That would be a nightmare.
Yeah, that'd be a whole other thing you'd have to manage, right? So one of the things that you mentioned was that once the back-to-back murders happened, if you will, that's when they started zeroing in. And there were, I guess, a couple of big things that helped. One was a palm print, right?
Correct.
And where did they find the palm print?
It was Betty Balcom's vehicle. She had a hatchback. And of course, he went through her car, stole everything out of her car, stole several things out of her home. And he had her car for a couple of days.
Mm.
When he decided to abandon it, he literally wiped down the entire car so that he would leave no fingerprints. But think about it. When you're pulling down a hatch, your palm gets on the inside of the car, not the outside.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying about the incredible job that was done by the crime scene techs and the police officers in this case. The crime scene tech opened the hatch of that car and fingerprinted underneath. And that's where the palm print was found. That was the only thing of his that was found in that car.
So that seems like that's kind of organized behavior.
To wipe it down.
Exactly. Exactly. You should be a prosecutor. That was my whole point when I crossed him.
Well, was DNA a thing? Like, were you able to get DNA from the women? How did DNA play?
It was pretty new.
Yeah.
DNA was pretty new. We got DNA out of some of the later victims. We didn't get them in the earlier victims. For example, Caroline Love was a missing person. She was victim number 2. We found her body when Henry Wallace led us to her 2 years later. So there's no DNA there.
Right.
Shauna Hawk, victim number 3, he put in a bathtub, left her fully clothed so nobody even would think it was a rape, wiped down her bathroom so that no fingerprints would be found. And of course, the bathtub, her being in the water, would have eliminated any DNA. Victim number 5 was Valencia Jumper, and he caught her apartment on fire and incinerated her basically. And she was ruled a fire death, so no rape kit was even done on her. So a lot of the murders were not even known to be murders at the time. So, but at the end, when his crack cocaine addiction took him over, he started getting sloppy.
Yeah, it seems like his behavior is really escalating. 2 murders in one day.
Yeah. Well, you know,
correct.
What I'm finding as we have this discussion, Marsha, is that you remember these victims and you remember which number they were and what happened to them. Is that normal for your cases, or is this case so embedded and so infuriating to you that you hang on to it?
Well, I mostly do remember victims, but not like I remember. I mean, the photos, if you showed me a photo of a Black female and it was one of these 10 women, I could immediately tell you who she was and the month and the year she died and how she died. Wow. And it's been I first started working on this case in 1994.
Wow.
So it's 29 years ago.
So you probably, as a prosecutor, you have to be somebody who really wants to be an advocate for the victims.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, jury selection, was that a tough situation? Did you go through it quickly?
It was, to be nice, it was one of the most horrible experiences of my life. Jury selection is never fun. It's never fun. The judge decided that he wanted 6 alternates in this case. We had to actually build a new jury box because there weren't enough seats in the jury box to accommodate 18 jurors. So we built an extra jury box to put them in.
Wow.
It took 6 weeks.
What?
To pick the jurors. 6 weeks.
That's crazy because the Murdaugh trial took like a day, 2 days.
And there was, and everybody knew about the story.
Weeks.
Why did it take so long?
And do you know how many jurors we lost? Do you know how many alternate jurors we seated?
Guessing none.
None. In a 4-month-long trial, every one of them hung in there.
And for those who don't know, there's usually 2.
Yeah.
Correct.
Why did it take so long to select the jury?
Because of the media coverage of the case. A lot of people knew about the case.
Oh.
And then you have to death qualify them. So if a juror says that they could never under any circumstances impose the death penalty, they're not qualified to sit and they get eliminated.
Gifting is hard. This isn't news. But what might be news is that you can now send beer, wine, and spirits right to your friends and family with Drizzly, the go-to app for alcohol delivery.
That's good news because adult beverages are the only gift that no one ever returns. Love it. And Drizzly's tailored experience lets you find the perfect drink for the occasion, no matter what it is.
You'll save time by shopping a huge selection of drinks from wherever you are.
You'll save money by comparing prices on said drinks across stores, and you'll get to spend more time sipping with your giftees, if they're the sharing type.
Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com. And get your favorite drinks delivered today.
Ding dong! Hello, friend. It's Drizzly! Must be 21 or over. Not available in all locations. Did the defense try a change of venue at all?
Oh, numerous times, yes.
If anyone knew about this case, were they immediately precluded from serving on this jury?
No, you have to know of the case and say, based on what you've heard or read, you've already formed an opinion as to guilt or innocence, or that you're unwilling to set that aside. Theoretically, a judge could keep you if you said you formed an opinion, but you're willing to set it aside. Even if the judge would let that person sit, one of the two of us, the prosecution or defense, would have probably bumped them anyway.
I read 400 exhibits, 75 witnesses sworn in, 7 hours of his taped confessions played in court. Now,
I think there were 100 witnesses for some reason.
Okay.
I don't think 75 is accurate.
but you did play
The exhibit count sounds right. I thought it was a little bit over 300.
but you played the confession.
Yes, so we did. That was the FBI let us borrow a system that they had that we could plug in, and so that the court personnel and the jurors could put headsets on and listen to them with no other noises. I remember the person who ended up being the foreperson of our jury started with the headphones and then took them off. And we had no idea why he wasn't listening with the headphones anymore. And after the trial, he said it was like he was whispering in my ear what he had done to those women, and I couldn't stand it.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Did you see obvious reactions from jurors?
Yes.
Okay.
Not like crying but you could just see they were disturbed.
Now, would you play those straight through, or would you stop and comment?
We didn't comment, but we played them. He actually confessed 12 times. They did an overall confession where even when they had him in custody, they didn't know there were 10 women. They didn't know until he wrote the 10 names down. And the first woman, which was Sharon Nance, he didn't know her name because she was the one, I think you referred to her on one of your previous podcasts as a sex worker. He didn't know her name, so he just put a question mark by her name. The police thought that he had killed Vanessa Mack and that he had killed Brandy Henderson, Betty Balcom, and Deborah Slaughter. The other 6 were unknown until he confessed to it. So He did the overall, then he did an individual confession to each of them. And then after he was done with that, they went back and did a, Henry, why do you think you did this confession?
What do you think was the biggest turning point in this trial? Like, was it the confession or something else?
I'm sure it was the confessions, yes. Because we had no eyewitnesses. Nobody saw him do any of this.
How long was the trial? And I know the timing, it must be near Christmas, New Year's, which...
It was.
Were you thinking you might lose some jurors because of the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I have never heard of a trial lasting this long where you didn't lose a single one for some reason. Yeah, we started in September and we ended at the end of January.
Oh my gosh, that is a long trial. How did your team deal with that length of every day knowing you're going into court and battling?
I have no earthly idea how I did it. I was a single mother of a 4-year-old child.
Wow.
I was in the military, so some weekends I was working. I have no idea how we did it. So.
Jeez. Did they take, how much time did they take off for Christmas and New Year's?
I don't remember, but I'm sure it wasn't inordinately long. It was probably just whatever the state holidays were.
Yeah, jeez.
I want to ask you about Wallace's demeanor in court. Did he show any sort of remorse?
None. Absolutely none.
When he was convicted finally, then he did give some sort of speech or...
Yes, he did, which caused Caroline Love's sister, whose name is Kathy, to literally run from the audience and try to jump on and attack him.
What?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Because she didn't think she didn't think he was sincere. Is that why?
No, he was quoting Matthew, and I can't remember what verse it was, but basically he was saying that people who don't forgive other sins are going to hell. Like, you better forgive
Jesus.
me or you're going to hell. He may have paraphrased, obviously, the verse, but that's what the intent of what he was saying was.
Talk about victim blaming, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Because, sometimes you read it in the media and it was like how contrite he was, but that's not the picture
He
there.
was never contrite.
In fact, bring up the religion, because one of the victims, he had pray with him, I believe, before
No, she prayed, yes. And prayed, and that made him mad.
Oh, okay. Man, there's so many different things that you're bringing light on. I am so intrigued by this. It was 2 years and 10 months after his arrest, convicted of 9 murders. You mentioned the South Carolina ones, didn't charge him with. And then he's convicted. Now, does the same jury decide whether it's the death penalty?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so do they go away and come back, or
what we do is then in the sentencing phase, you present more evidence. That's where a lot more of the poor little Henry Wallace, he was abused defense came out.
Okay.
It's called evidence and mitigation, and I don't mean to make fun of it in general, but in his case, I was making fun of it. For example, his expert said that he told them that his mother wanted him potty trained when he was 1 year old and would beat him when he would have accidents. Matt, do you remember being 1 year old?
No, I don't remember being 1 year old, but I remember having a 1 year old.
I can't remember being 30.
Yeah.
So basically, whatever story Henry told them, the experts spit it out to the jury as facts. That's why I was making fun of it. I mean, mitigation evidence is a very important part of our system. But to me, it was not compelling when you have raped, brutalized, and tortured we knew of 12 women. The fact that your mother may have spanked you for having a poopy in your diaper doesn't explain that one to me.
No, yeah, that does seem like a bit of a reach. And the judge, when he sentenced him, said, "May God have mercy on your soul." And he's been in jail for 26 years, and he married his nurse.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, she was a different kind of person, because we had, the trial was from September to January, but before that, we had change of venue hearings, we had DNA hearings, we had a 1-week hearing on the admissibility of his confessions. And her name was Rebecca Torrejón, I believe, and she was present for that. And she told one of the deputies during a break, they were not married at the time, she told one of the deputies at the break, as soon as Henry gets out of jail, we're getting married. She sat in there and listened to his confessions and thought he was going to walk free.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think his best case scenario was not death row.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I nowadays the victims have a chance to speak. Was it that way then? And did anybody speak?
Yes, they did. I don't remember, obviously there were 10 families, or 9 families. So I don't remember what each and every one of them said. I do remember probably one of the most touching, saddening moments I've ever had in court. Valencia Jumper, the one that was the ruled as a fire death. She had jewelry on her hands, okay, a watch and some stuff, or she wore jewelry and had a watch. Well, she was burnt very badly. The watch was still on her wrist, but all of her rings were missing, which was one of the reasons the family insisted this was not an accidental fire death. They swore their daughter had been murdered, and nobody would listen to them. The fire department said no. The medical examiner said no, that it was a fire death. Well, one day after she was killed, guess who pawned her jewelry?
I was going to ask you that question. Did he keep
Yes.
those as mementos, or did he sell them?
So we had pawn slips and went back and got some of the jewelry as evidence, okay? So at the end of the trial, Mr. Jumper, who was a retired Air Force guy, very tall, dignified man, gray hair, he's like, "Can I get my daughter's jewelry back?" And so I asked the judge, and this is an open court, the courtroom was packed. And the judge, asked the defense if they objected, and they said no. And I just thought it would be released at some later date. And the judge said, approach the clerk. And that poor man walked past Henry Wallace and up to the clerk and was handed his dead daughter's rings.
Oh, geez.
Oh my gosh.
And was crying and went back to his seat. I'll never forget that.
Wow. Wow. Well, we really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and shedding some light on this case that I haven't seen printed in very many places. That is for sure, if at all.
No.
Could I take a couple of minutes to address the issue of whether or not the police should or should not have seen this coming?
Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely. I didn't. Yeah, go ahead.
From 1992 to 1994, it was the height of the crack epidemic, and Charlotte had over 300 murders in that time period. Okay?
Yeah.
In 1993 alone, there were 120 murders. Of those 120 murders, 3 of them were Henry Wallace. One of them was Valencia Jumper, so she wasn't counted as a murder at the time. 3 murders out of 120 is a little bit over 2% of the murders. What pattern is there in 2%? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
4 of the 10 of his murders were in 1 month, in 3 weeks. So before that, you had 6 murders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of 300. 6 murders, 2 of which were not known to be murders, because one was Caroline Love, who was only missing, and one was Valencia Jumper, who was a fire death. So you had 4 out of 300. What's the pattern? There is none. He beat Sharon Nance to death outside with a rock and left her naked. Caroline Love was not found, so there's no pattern yet. Victim number 3 was Shauna Hawk. She was strangled, but they thought at first she had been drowned because she was in a bathtub. Victim number 4, and Shauna was fully clothed. Victim number 4 was strangled to death with her own bra and was left naked, not clothed. Victim number 5, fire death. Victim number 6 was another ligature strangulation, but with a belt, and she was stabbed 4 times, and she was only one at that point that was a mother. The rest were just single females, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then basically the next 4 came within 3 weeks, and they were ligature strangulations, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Vanessa Little Mac was strangled. She was a mother as well. Her little infant baby was found by her mother when she didn't hear from, or found by her grandmother when the grandmother didn't hear from her daughter. The police did such a good job on that. And he changed his areas of town too, his locations. So these women weren't in the same part of town. You got 4 murders out of 300 that were strangulations. So that's less than 1%.
Right. So,
and if anybody that tells you about strangulation is usually a very personal form of murder, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife type of thing. And none of these cases had a sign of forced entry, suggesting that the women knew their attackers and let them in. Who do serial killers kill? Strangers.
Right.
He was the first one that I had ever heard of that killed all women he knew. So they were all looking at boyfriends. The police were investigating that. But the one thing they did interesting with Vanessa Mac's case is they got her bank records, saw a use of her teller card, and got the picture from the machine. Once again, even then, Henry Wallace was so smart, he averted his face. So his face was not in the picture. But what was in the picture was his ear with a hoop cross earring. When the 2 women were killed at the Lake Apartments, the first body discovered was Brandy Henderson. She was killed second, but discovered first. They asked her boyfriend who would she let in to the apartment. And he gave them 4 names. She was very security conscious, and these are the only 4 people she would let in, and one of which was Henry Wallace. Well, that detective went and ran the names of everybody and found Henry Wallace's mugshot took it in to Brandy's boyfriend and said, "Is this him?" And he said, "Yes." Well, that picture was on the table, and Detective Stansberry, who was working Betty Balcom's murder and who had worked Vanessa Mack's murder, walked in to ask a question, and he saw that mugshot with the hoop cross earring and went ding, ding, ding.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That the man who had Vanessa Mack's bank card had an earring just like that.
Light bulb
That's
moment.
when they started putting it all together. They had that palm print, they ran it, and it was Henry Louis Wallace. And literally within, I think, 2 days of that, they had a serial killer in custody. That's how good of a job they did.
Yep, and that's not the way it's painted sometimes when you read about it.
Oh, it's not painted that way at all. And those guys back then worked such long hours because they were so undermanned. And for them to have got the beating that they took, it was unwarranted. I've worked with a lot of detectives in my life, and these guys were totally dedicated.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? You brought up something that made me throw this question out, because you mentioned multiple times about how, I guess, smart, for lack of a better term, and he used certain words like modus operandus and changed his pattern. He talked about, do you think he was reading about police work or somewhere aware of that?
Yes, he told, or if you can believe him, he told his psychiatric experts. Remember those? Y'all might not remember because I'm my 60s. So there used to be these called True Detective magazines.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. I used to read that.
Yeah.
Yes. And they would cover all these killings and have these pictures of women and all that.
Yeah.
Henry read those things. And when you talk about the way he talked, when he talked about how he did Valencia Jumper's murder, she had just moved in and they had done a check and she had batteries in her smoke detector. He took the batteries out of her smoke detector. And how he started the fire was, he said, "I used alcohol because it is an undetectable accelerant."
Oh.
He then went into her kitchen, put a pot of beans on the stove, turned it all the way up, took that alcohol from the pot of beans and ran it all the way to the bedroom in the bed in which she was in.
Jeez.
Lit it and ran. And the firefighters bought it. They saw the burn patterns from the stove all the way to the bedroom. He took the batteries out because he wanted to make sure that the fire was fully engaged before anybody called it in to make sure her body was burnt up. That's how meticulous he was.
Yeah, those kind of things, the mitigating circumstances seem to be contradicted.
Yes, they do.
Yes. Again, thank you very much, Marsha. We super appreciate it and appreciate all the good work you've done over the years.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That was so amazing, because I've watched a 2020 special that was done on the Charlotte Strangler, Taco Bell Strangler. I've read what's it called, Murderpedia or something that's out there, and Wikipedia. And there was a whole lot of new things I learned from her, and I appreciate her time. We are going to get a hold of the woman who she took on in court during the trial, who spoke up for Wallace not getting the death penalty. Her name is
Ann Burgess.
And we're going to be talking to her in an upcoming episode. This story is taken off. We appreciate you hanging with us. Very much appreciated. This all started, Michael DeWitt did a story on the Wicked South about it, so we're going to share this with the Wicked South listeners. You can go to the Wicked South podcast for more. You can check out Impact of Influence Facebook page and Michael DeWitt on socials. And we're just so grateful that you continue to spend time with us. Reach out to me, Matt Harris, podcast@gmail.com, and we'll talk soon, friend.